The shy barista's heart hurts when the Mafia boss ignores her in public. But privately he's treasures her. Jessica Richards pressed her back against the cold brick wall of the storage room, her hands trembling around a ceramic coffee mug she'd forgotten she was holding. Through the narrow gap in the door, she watched him. Eric Gomez stood at the center of her tiny Portland coffee shop, surrounded by 3 men in dark suits. His black shirt stretched across his broad shoulders, sleeves rolled to expose forearms covered in intricate tattoos. A scar cut through his left eyebrow. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold. He looked nothing like the man who had held her face in those same tattooed hands last night, whispering that she was beautiful. One of his men pointed toward the counter, toward where Jessica normally stood. "The barista?" the man asked. "She's cute. You know her?" Eric didn't blink. "No," he said. "Never seen her before." Jessica's mug slipped. It shattered against the floor. And Eric Gomez walked out without looking back. Why would the most dangerous man in Portland pretend she didn't exist? If you want to know what happens next, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. A special shout out to all our loves and lovelies, both new and returning, watching from the United States, Canada, the Netherlands, South Africa, Australia, Germany, the United Kingdom, and every corner of the world. Thank you for being here and supporting these stories. Your support is the reason we keep creating stories like this. Let's begin. 3 months earlier, Jessica had been invisible. That was the word for it. Invisible. Not mistreated, not bullied, just unseen. She moved through Portland like a ghost, from her tiny apartment in the Hawthorne district to her morning shift at Rosaline's Coffee House on Southeast Division Street. The shop was old. Exposed brick, mismatched wooden chairs, a chalkboard menu that Jessica rewrote every Monday. The owner, Rosaline, was 73 and let Jessica run the place however she wanted. Most days, Jessica worked alone. She preferred it that way. At 24, Jessica had mastered the art of small talk without connection. She could smile at customers, remember their orders, ask about their weekends. But when her shift ended, she went home to her studio apartment, made pasta for one, and read romance novels until she fell asleep. No friends. No family nearby. Her parents were back in Ohio, and she hadn't spoken to her older sister in 2 years. Some falling out about a man who wasn't worth the argument. Portland was supposed to be a fresh start. A place where nobody knew her, where she could rebuild herself into someone braver. So far, she had only gotten quieter. It was a Tuesday when Eric Gomez first walked into Rosaline's. The morning rush had ended. Jessica was wiping down the espresso machine, humming along to the folk music playing through the shop's old speakers. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up with her practiced customer smile. Then she stopped. The man standing in the doorway was tall. Over 6 feet, with black hair pushed back from his face and a jaw that looked carved from stone. He wore a charcoal gray coat over a black turtleneck, and even from across the room, Jessica could see the tattoos creeping up his neck. He looked like danger. He looked like the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about. He also looked directly at her, and didn't look away. Jessica felt her face flush. She dropped her rag. She said. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. The man walked toward the counter, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. 2 other men had entered behind him, both in suits, both with earpieces. They stayed near the door, scanning the shop like they expected a threat to emerge from behind the pastry case. Jessica's heart hammered. She had no idea what was happening. The man reached the counter and stopped. Up close, she could see his eyes were dark brown, almost black. The scar through his eyebrow was faded but distinct. A rose tattoo climbed the left side of his neck, its petals disappearing beneath his collar. "Coffee," he said. His voice was low and rough. "Black." Jessica nodded too many times. "Black. Okay. Yes. Black coffee. Coming up." She turned toward the coffee pots, nearly tripping over her own feet. Her hands shook as she grabbed a mug. She could feel him watching her. Why was he watching her? Why was someone who looked like that in her tiny, run-down coffee shop? She poured the coffee without spilling. A miracle. When she turned back, he was still staring. Not at the menu. Not at his phone. At her. $3.50, Jessica whispered. He pulled $100 bill from his pocket and placed it on the counter. Keep it, he said. Jessica blinked. That's almost $100 tip. I know. He picked up the mug, took a slow sip, and something in his expression shifted. The hardness didn't disappear, but it softened around the edges. Like he'd tasted something that surprised him. Good coffee, he said. And then he smiled. It was small. Barely there. But it transformed his entire face. The scar, the tattoos, the coldness, they all faded behind that smile. Jessica forgot how to breathe. Thank you, she managed. He finished the coffee in silence, set the mug down, and left without another word. His men followed, and within seconds, Rosaline's coffee house was empty again. Jessica stood frozen behind the counter, the $100 bill still sitting there. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know why he'd come. But some part of her, some foolish part she thought she'd buried years ago, hoped he would come back. He did. The next day, same time, same order. Black coffee. Another $100 bill. Another quiet smile when he finished. He didn't say much. Neither did she. But he stayed longer that second day, sitting at the table nearest the counter, watching her work. Not in a creepy way. In a way that made Jessica feel, for the first time in years, like someone actually saw her. On the third day, he spoke. You're always alone here, he said. Jessica looked up from the latte she was making for a college student who had already left. Rosaline trusts me with the morning shift. It's usually quiet. You don't like crowds. It wasn't a question. It was an observation, delivered with the same certainty as someone stating the sky was blue. No, Jessica admitted. I don't. He nodded slowly. Neither do I. She almost laughed. You have 2 bodyguards with you. Necessary evil. He stood, leaving another $100 on the counter. But this time, he paused at the door. Eric, he said. Jessica frowned. What? My name. Eric Gomez. Then he was gone. That night, Jessica made the mistake of searching his name online. Eric Gomez. 41 years old. Son of Mateo Gomez, deceased. Rumored head of the Gomez family, one of Portland's most powerful crime organizations. Never convicted of anything. Never even arrested. But the articles painted a clear picture. Eric Gomez was not a businessman. He was not a regular customer. He was a monster in a tailored coat. Jessica should have been terrified. She should have called Rosaline and begged to switch shifts. She should have done anything to avoid seeing him again. Instead, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering the way he'd smiled at her. And she knew with absolute certainty that when he walked through that door tomorrow, she would pour his coffee and keep his money and pretend she didn't know what he was. Because for 3 days, Eric Gomez had made her feel visible. And she wasn't ready to give that up. 6 weeks later, Jessica was in his bed. She still didn't fully understand how it happened. The progression felt natural at the time, like sliding into warm water inch by inch until suddenly you're submerged. Eric kept coming to Rosaline's. Every morning, same time, same order. But he started staying longer. An hour. Then 2. He would sit at that corner table with his coffee, answering emails on his phone, while Jessica worked. Sometimes they talked. Mostly about nothing. The weather. The folk music she played. A book she was reading. He asked questions like he genuinely wanted to know the answers, and he remembered everything she said. You mentioned your sister yesterday, he said one morning, 3 weeks in. The one in Ohio. Jessica froze mid-pour. I did. You said you hadn't spoken in 2 years. That it was about a man. She set the coffee pot down carefully. You remember that? Eric looked at her with those dark eyes. I remember everything you tell me. That was the moment Jessica realized she was in trouble. The first time he touched her was an accident. She was restocking cups on a high shelf, standing on her tiptoes, when he appeared behind her and reached over her head. Let me, he said. His chest pressed against her back. His arm brushed her shoulder. He smelled like cedar and something smoky, and Jessica's entire body went still. He placed the cups on the shelf. Then he didn't move. Neither did she. Jessica. His voice was low, right next to her ear. She turned around. They were inches apart. Up close, she could see every detail of his face. The faded scar. The stubble along his jaw. The way his pupils had expanded, swallowing the dark brown of his irises. This is a bad idea, he said. I know, she whispered. He kissed her anyway. It wasn't gentle. His hands gripped her waist, lifting her onto the counter like she weighed nothing. His mouth was demanding, hungry, and Jessica grabbed the front of his shirt just to anchor herself. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. I don't do relationships, he said. The words were flat. Practiced. Like he'd said them 100 times before. Jessica should have been insulted. She should have pushed him away, told him to leave, protected whatever remained of her dignity. But she looked at this man, this dangerous, powerful man, and saw something beneath the warning. Something almost like fear. Okay, she said. His brow furrowed. Okay. No relationship. I understand. Eric studied her face for a long moment. You deserve better than what I can offer. Probably, Jessica agreed. But I'm not asking for more. She meant it. At least, she thought she did. That night, he took her to his penthouse in the Pearl District. The building was sleek and modern, all glass and steel, with a private elevator that required a fingerprint scan. His apartment occupied the entire top floor. Jessica stood in the living room, surrounded by minimalist furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and felt like she'd stepped into another universe. You live here alone? She asked. Yes. It's big. It's private. He walked toward her slowly, like approaching a skittish animal. No one comes here. Not my men. Not business associates. No one. Jessica understood what he wasn't saying. This was his sanctuary. And he was letting her in. She expected him to be rough with her. Everything about Eric Gomez screamed intensity, dominance, control. She braced herself for it, told herself she could handle it. But when he finally led her to his bedroom, everything changed. He undressed her slowly, like unwrapping something precious. His calloused hands traced her skin with a tenderness that made her chest ache. When she trembled, he paused. Tell me if you want to stop, he murmured against her collarbone. At any point. Tell me and I stop. I don't want to stop. He lifted his head, meeting her eyes. I need you to understand something. I'm not gentle with other people. I don't do this. Do what? He brushed a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was so soft, so careful, that Jessica's throat tightened. Care, he said quietly. I don't care. But with you, I can't seem to stop. Then he kissed her again, and there were no more words. He was still dominant. Still in control. But every touch carried a reverence that made Jessica feel like the most important thing in his world. He watched her face constantly, adjusted when she tensed, whispered praise against her skin when she relaxed. Afterward, she expected him to call her a car. That's what happened in arrangements like this, wasn't it? The transaction ended, and everyone went back to their separate lives. But Eric pulled her against his chest and wrapped an arm around her waist. Stay, he said. Not a question. Almost a plea. Jessica stayed. She woke up at 3 a.m. to find him watching her. "You're staring," she mumbled, still half asleep. "You're beautiful." She buried her face in the pillow, embarrassed. "Stop. I mean it." His hand found hers in the darkness. "I've never brought anyone here before. To this apartment. You're the first." Jessica lifted her head. "Why me?" Eric was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I don't know. That's what terrifies me." Their arrangement continued through the following weeks. He would text her after her shift ended, always the same message, just an address or a time, and she would go to him. Sometimes to the penthouse. Sometimes to a private back room at a restaurant he owned. Once, to a cabin in the Columbia River Gorge, where they spent an entire weekend without seeing another soul. In private, Eric was everything Jessica never knew she needed. He cooked for her. Simple things, pasta and sauce, but he cooked. He asked about her day and listened to her answers. He held her while she slept and was always there when she woke up. He started keeping things for her at the penthouse. A toothbrush. A robe. Her favorite brand of tea. "You didn't have to do that," she said when she found the tea in his kitchen cabinet. "You mentioned you liked it. Once. Weeks ago." He shrugged, but there was something vulnerable in his expression. Like he was waiting for her to reject the gesture. She didn't. But outside those private moments, everything was different. The first time Jessica saw Eric in public, she was walking down Northwest 23rd Avenue on her day off. She spotted him across the street, standing with a group of men in front of an upscale restaurant. Her heart lifted. She raised her hand to wave. Eric looked directly at her. Then he turned away, said something to his men, and walked inside without acknowledging her existence. Jessica's hand dropped. She stood on the sidewalk, frozen, as pedestrians flowed around her. Maybe he didn't see her. Maybe the sun was in his eyes. Maybe there was an explanation. She texted him that night. "Saw you on 23rd today. Tried to wave." His response came an hour later. "I know. Sorry. Can't acknowledge you in public. Too dangerous. Come over tonight." Jessica stared at the message for a long time. Too dangerous. Of course. He was a crime boss. Being seen with her could put her at risk. It made sense. It was logical. He was protecting her. She went to his apartment that night. He greeted her at the door with a kiss so deep it made her dizzy, and she let herself forget the sting of being ignored. But the pattern repeated. Again and again. She saw him at a grocery store in the Alberta Arts District. He walked past her like she was invisible. She spotted him at a gas station on Burnside. He didn't even glance her direction. She passed him on the street outside her own coffee shop, and he kept his eyes forward, his expression stone, as if she were a stranger he'd never met. Every time, he apologized later. Every time, he explained it was for her safety. Every time, he held her so tenderly in private that she almost believed it was okay. Almost. Because late at night, when Eric was asleep and Jessica was staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, she couldn't ignore the ache growing in her chest. She was falling in love with him. And she was starting to realize that loving someone in secret might slowly break her apart. 4 months into their arrangement, Eric started acting strange. It began with small things. He would cancel their plans last minute, sending brief texts with no explanation. "Can't tonight. Soon." Or he would show up at the penthouse distracted, checking his phone constantly, stepping into another room to take calls he wouldn't explain. Jessica didn't ask questions. That was part of their deal, wasn't it? No strings. No demands. No expectations beyond the moments they shared together. But the distance started to hurt in ways she couldn't hide. One Thursday night, she arrived at the penthouse to find Eric standing at the window, staring out at the Portland skyline. He didn't turn when she entered. Didn't greet her with the usual kiss that made her feel like the only woman in the world. Hey, she said softly. Hey. His voice was flat. Tired. Jessica set down her bag and walked toward him slowly. Everything okay? Fine. It wasn't fine. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched tight. His hands were shoved in his pockets, and even from behind, he looked like a man carrying something too heavy to name. She stopped a few feet away, uncertain. In 4 months, she had learned to read Eric's moods. When to push. When to stay quiet. When to simply exist beside him until he was ready to speak. Tonight felt different. Tonight felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the ground beneath her might crumble. I could go, she offered. If you need space. Eric turned then. His eyes were dark, shadowed with something that looked almost like pain. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her against his chest. Don't go, he said into her hair. Please. That word. Please. Eric Gomez didn't say please. He gave orders. He made statements. He controlled every room he walked into. But here, in his private sanctuary, holding a shy barista who had no business being in his world, he said please like it was the only word he knew. Jessica wrapped her arms around him and held on. They didn't talk about what was bothering him. They never did. Instead, Eric led her to the couch and pulled her onto his lap, cradling her against him like something fragile and precious. He stroked her hair in silence while the city lights glittered beyond the windows. I'm handling some things, he finally said. Business. It's complicated. You don't have to explain. I know. But I want you to understand that it's not about you. When I'm distant, it's never about you. Jessica lifted her head to look at him. I know. But did she? Sometimes, in the quiet hours alone in her apartment, she wondered. Maybe he was tired of her. Maybe the novelty had worn off. Maybe she was just a temporary distraction for a man who could have anyone he wanted. Eric cupped her face in his hands. His thumbs traced her cheekbones with that devastating gentleness that always undid her. You're the only thing that makes sense right now, he said. Everything else is chaos. But you're calm. You're quiet. Being with you is the only time I can breathe. Jessica's heart cracked open a little more. She kissed him then, trying to pour everything she couldn't say into the gesture. The love she was too scared to name. The fear she was too proud to admit. The desperate hope that somehow, against all odds, this would turn into something real. Eric kissed her back like a man drowning. And for one more night, she let herself believe it was enough. The following week, Jessica's world tilted sideways. It started with a newspaper. She was restocking napkins at Rosaline's when a customer left a copy of the Oregonian on one of the tables. Jessica grabbed it to throw away, but a headline caught her eye. Gomez family allegedly connected to warehouse district shooting. Her blood went cold. She read the article with trembling hands. 2 men had been found dead in an abandoned warehouse near the Willamette River. Police suspected gang involvement. An anonymous source claimed the Gomez family was responsible, though no arrests had been made. Eric's face wasn't in the article. His name was mentioned only once, buried in the 3rd paragraph. But seeing it there, in black and white, made everything suddenly real. She was sleeping with a man who might have ordered people killed. Jessica set the newspaper down and walked into the back room. She leaned against the wall and focused on breathing. In. Out. In. Out. She knew what Eric was. She had known since that first Google search, since she read words like organized crime and alleged criminal enterprise and suspected involvement in racketeering. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it viscerally were 2 different things. That night, she didn't respond to Eric's text. He called. She let it go to voicemail. He called again. Same thing. By the 3rd call, she finally answered. Jessica. His voice was urgent, worried. What's wrong? You didn't answer. I saw the newspaper. Silence. The warehouse, she continued. Those men. More silence. It stretched between them like a canyon. I can't explain that, Eric finally said. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? Jessica pressed the phone tighter to her ear. Her apartment felt too small, too quiet, too empty. I don't know. I needed to hear your voice. I would never hurt you. His words were fierce, almost desperate. I need you to know that. Whatever you've read, whatever you've heard, I would never let anything happen to you. I know. Do you? Because you didn't answer my calls, and I thought. He stopped. Drew a breath. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled. I thought you were done with me. Jessica closed her eyes. I'm not done with you. Then come over. Please. Let me see you. She should say no. She should end this now, before she fell any deeper into a world she didn't belong in. She should protect herself the way she had always protected herself, by staying invisible, staying safe, staying alone. But she had never been smart when it came to Eric Gomez. Okay, she whispered. I'm coming. That night was different from all the others. Eric didn't touch her when she arrived. He stood in the living room, hands at his sides, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Sit down, he said. Please. Jessica sat on the edge of the couch. He sat across from her in an armchair, keeping distance between them for the first time since their arrangement began. I'm not a good man, he said. The words were blunt, unvarnished. I've done things that would horrify you. I've made choices that I can't take back. And if you want to walk away right now, I won't stop you. Jessica's throat tightened. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know what you're involved in. Because the newspaper is just the beginning. There are people who want to destroy me, and the closer you are, the more danger you're in. You said you'd protect me. I will. With my life. But I can't protect you from who I am. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head bowed. The powerful crime boss who controlled half of Portland looked, in that moment, like a man who had lost everything. I keep telling myself to end this, he said quietly. Every day, I tell myself to let you go. You're too good, too pure, too gentle for my world. You should be with someone who can hold your hand in public. Someone who can give you a normal life. Jessica's heart was pounding. But Eric lifted his head. His eyes were raw. But I'm too selfish to give you up. I've tried. God, I've tried. But then I think about never seeing you again, never holding you again, and I can't breathe. He stood abruptly and walked to the window, putting his back to her. Tell me to stop, he said. Tell me you're done, and I'll disappear from your life. You'll never see me again. Jessica sat frozen on the couch, heart racing, mind spinning. This was her chance. Her exit. A clean break before she fell so deep that climbing out became impossible. But looking at Eric's silhouette against the city lights, seeing the tension in his shoulders and the pain he was trying so hard to hide, she realized something devastating. It was already too late. She was already in love with him. She crossed the room and placed her hand on his back. He flinched at her touch, then slowly relaxed. I'm not done, she said softly. I don't care about the danger. I don't care about the newspaper. I just want to be with you. Eric turned. His eyes searched her face, looking for hesitation, for fear, for doubt. Finding none, something in his expression broke open. He pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she couldn't breathe. I don't deserve you, he murmured against her hair. Jessica closed her eyes and breathed him in. Maybe he didn't. Maybe she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Maybe loving Eric Gomez would destroy her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But standing there in his arms, she couldn't bring herself to care. And that, she would later realize, was exactly the problem. 5 months in, and Jessica had memorized the architecture of her own heartbreak. She knew the exact way Eric's face would close off when they passed each other in public. The precise angle he would turn his head to avoid meeting her eyes. The specific coldness that would settle over his features, transforming the man who whispered sweetness against her skin into a stranger who looked right through her. She told herself it was fine. She told herself she understood. But understanding something and surviving it were not the same thing. It was a Saturday afternoon in late October when everything shattered. Jessica had the day off from Rosaline's. She decided to walk through the Pearl District, maybe browse the bookstores, maybe grab lunch at one of the cafes she could never afford on her barista salary. The autumn air was crisp, and the trees lining the streets had erupted into shades of gold and crimson. For the first time in weeks, she felt almost normal. Almost like a regular 24-year-old woman enjoying a beautiful day in Portland. Then she saw him. Eric was standing outside a restaurant called Ondina on Northwest Glisson Street. She recognized it from one of the nights he'd taken her there after hours, when the place was empty and they'd eaten Peruvian food at a candlelit table in the back. But today, the restaurant was open. The sidewalk was crowded. And Eric wasn't alone. He stood with a group of men Jessica recognized as his associates. Expensive suits. Hard faces. The kind of men who made her instinctively cross to the other side of the street. She should have kept walking. She knew that. But something made her stop at a storefront nearby, pretending to examine the window display while she watched. A woman approached the group. She was tall. Elegant. Raven black hair cascading over a designer coat that probably cost more than Jessica's rent. She walked with the confidence of someone who had never been invisible a day in her life. The woman placed her hand on Eric's arm, leaned in close, said something that made the men around them laugh. Eric smiled. Not the small, private smile he gave Jessica. A different smile. An easy, charming smile that belonged to the public version of him. The crime boss. The powerful man. The person Jessica was never allowed to know. She should have left. She knew she should have left. But her feet carried her closer instead. She moved behind a group of tourists, close enough now to hear fragments of conversation through the noise of the street. Been too long, Eric, the woman was saying. Her voice was smooth and cultured. We should have dinner. Catch up properly. Veronica, one of the men said, grinning. You know Eric doesn't do dinner. He doesn't do anything that involves commitment. Laughter rippled through the group. That's true, Eric said. His voice carried clearly across the sidewalk. No attachments. No complications. That's how I like it. No special woman hidden away somewhere? Veronica asked, her tone teasing. Jessica held her breath. Eric's laugh was cold. Dismissive. Nothing like the warm chuckle she sometimes coaxed from him late at night. Please, he said. The day I settle down is the day hell freezes over. Women are entertainment. Nothing more. The men laughed again. Veronica looked pleased. Jessica's vision blurred. She told herself to move. Told herself to walk away before she heard anything else. But her body had stopped obeying commands. She stood frozen on the sidewalk, heart crumbling in her chest. What about that little coffee shop? One of the men asked. I've seen you going there every morning. Don't tell me you're slumming it for the atmosphere. Jessica's stomach dropped. Eric's expression didn't change. The coffee's good. And the barista? The man grinned. She's cute. Quiet type. Bet she'd be easy to. She's nobody. The words landed like a blow. Just a barista, Eric continued. His voice was flat. Bored. Pours decent coffee. That's it. You think I'd waste my time on someone like that? Some shy little girl who can barely make eye contact. The men laughed. Veronica laughed. And Jessica shattered. She didn't remember walking away. Didn't remember how she got from Northwest Glisson Street back to her apartment in Hawthorne. One moment she was standing on that sidewalk, listening to the man she loved describe her as nobody. The next, she was sitting on her kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Some shy little girl who can barely make eye contact. She's nobody. The words played on repeat in her head. Every tender moment with Eric, every whispered confession, every night he'd held her like she was precious, all of it crumbled to dust. Had any of it been real? Or had she been exactly what he said? Entertainment. A distraction. Something to use and discard when he got bored. Her phone buzzed. Eric's name on the screen. Coming over tonight. Miss you. Jessica stared at the message until the screen went dark. Then she picked up the phone, typed a response, and deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Finally, she turned the phone off and dropped it on the counter. She couldn't do this anymore. She avoided him for 3 days. It was harder than she expected. Eric called. Texted. Showed up at Rosaline's, only to find that Jessica had switched her shift with another barista who worked evenings. By the 3rd day, his messages had become frantic. Jessica, what's wrong? Did I do something? Please answer me. I'm worried about you. Just tell me you're okay. She read each one and felt nothing. The pain had dulled into numbness, a protective shell around her heart. It was easier this way. Easier to feel empty than to feel everything. On the 4th day, he showed up at her apartment. Jessica was curled on her couch, still in the same sweatpants she'd worn for 2 days, when the knock came. She knew it was him before she even looked through the peephole. Jessica. His voice was muffled through the door. I know you're in there. Please open up. She didn't move. I'm not leaving, he said. I'll stand here all night if I have to. Just talk to me. Tell me what happened. Something cracked in her numbness. A flicker of anger, hot and sharp. She opened the door. Eric stood in the hallway, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, shirt wrinkled, jaw shadowed with stubble, dark circles under his eyes. The moment he saw her, relief flooded his face. Thank God, he breathed. I thought something happened to you. I was about to send my men to check hospitals. I'm fine. Her voice was flat. Dead. It stopped Eric mid-sentence. He studied her face, and something in his expression shifted to concern. You're not fine. What's going on? Jessica stepped back from the doorway. Not an invitation to enter. A retreat. I heard you, she said. Eric frowned. Heard me? When? Saturday. Outside on dinner. You were with your associates. And a woman. Veronica. She watched his face carefully. Watched the confusion give way to realization. Watched the color drain from his skin. Jessica. She's nobody, Jessica quoted. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. Just a barista. Some shy little girl who can barely make eye contact. Eric closed his eyes. That's not. Women are entertainment. Nothing more. The anger was building now, cracking through the numbness. Is that what I am to you, Eric? Entertainment? No. He stepped toward her. God, no. You have to understand, I was. What? Protecting me? Keeping me safe? Jessica laughed, and the sound was brittle. I've heard that excuse for months. Every time you walked past me on the street. Every time you pretended I didn't exist. I told myself it was okay. I told myself it meant something that you were different in private. Her voice broke. But maybe you're not different. Maybe the man I see when we're alone is the performance, and the one who called me nobody is the real you. That's not true. Eric's voice was raw. Desperate. Jessica, please. Let me explain. Explain what? That you're ashamed of me? That you think I'm beneath you? That I'm just some convenient distraction until someone better comes along. None of that is true. Then why? The word tore from her throat. Why would you say those things? Even if you were trying to protect me, you didn't have to humiliate me. You didn't have to make me sound pathetic. You didn't have to laugh. Eric stood in her doorway, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked truly helpless. Because I'm a coward, he said quietly. Because admitting that I care about you would make you a target. And because I've spent so long pretending not to feel anything that I forgot how to be honest, even when it matters most. Jessica shook her head. Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and relentless. That's not good enough. I know. I can't do this anymore, Eric. The words hung between them like a death sentence. Eric's face contorted with pain. Jessica, please. I'll do better. You'll what? Acknowledge me in public? Hold my hand on the street? Tell your associates that the shy little barista actually means something to you. He didn't answer. And his silence told her everything. That's what I thought, Jessica whispered. Goodbye, Eric. She stepped back and closed the door in his face. He stood outside for 20 minutes. She heard him pacing, heard him make several attempts to knock again, heard him finally walk away. When the hallway went silent, Jessica sank to the floor and cried until she had nothing left. The first week without Eric was the hardest. Jessica moved through her days like a ghost. She woke up, showered, went to work, came home, stared at the ceiling until exhaustion pulled her under. The routine was mechanical. Empty. A body going through motions while the person inside had checked out. Rosaline noticed. The old woman showed up at the coffee shop on a Tuesday morning, which she rarely did anymore. She watched Jessica wipe down the same counter 3 times, rearrange the pastry display for no reason, and stare blankly at customers who asked simple questions. Sit, Rosaline said finally, pointing to a chair in the corner. I'm working. The shop is empty. Sit. Jessica sat. Rosaline lowered herself into the opposite chair with the careful movements of a woman whose joints had seen better decades. Her eyes, still sharp despite her age, studied Jessica's face with uncomfortable intensity. You look terrible, she said. Jessica almost laughed. Thanks. I'm serious. You've lost weight. Your eyes are red. You haven't smiled at a single customer all morning. Rosaline leaned forward. What happened? The question cracked something open in Jessica's chest. She had been holding everything so tightly, refusing to let anyone see how broken she was. But sitting across from this woman who had given her a job when she had nothing, who had trusted her with her beloved coffee shop, who had never asked for anything in return, Jessica couldn't keep pretending. There was a man, she said quietly. Rosaline nodded slowly. The one with the tattoos. He stopped coming. Jessica's head snapped up. You knew. I'm old, not blind. A faint smile crossed Rosaline's weathered face. I saw the way he looked at you. Like you were the only person in the room. And I saw the way you looked at him. Like he hung the moon. Jessica's throat tightened. It's over now. Why? Such a simple question. Such a complicated answer. Because I wasn't enough, Jessica whispered. Because he was ashamed of me. Because loving someone in secret eventually breaks you, and I couldn't break anymore. Rosaline was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. Did he tell you he was ashamed? Or did you decide that for him? I heard him. Talking to his friends. He called me nobody. He said I was just entertainment. Rosaline's expression didn't change. And you believed him? He said it. Why wouldn't I believe it? Because sometimes, Rosaline said carefully, men say things they don't mean to protect things they're afraid to lose. It doesn't make it right. But it doesn't always make it true either. Jessica shook her head. You don't understand. He's not a normal man. He's dangerous. Powerful. He has a reputation to protect. And I'm just... She gestured at herself. This. A barista. Nobody special. Rosaline reached across the table and took Jessica's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Listen to me, she said. I've lived 73 years. I've loved and lost and made more mistakes than I can count. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the people who think they're nobody are usually the ones who matter most. Jessica's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. He hurt me, she said. Even if he didn't mean it. He hurt me. I know. Rosaline squeezed her hand. And he needs to answer for that. But don't let his mistake convince you that you're worthless. You're not. You never were. The bell above the door chimed. A customer walked in. Rosaline released Jessica's hand and stood slowly. I'll let you get back to work. But think about what I said. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones fighting hardest not to. She left without another word. Jessica stood behind the counter, made the customer's latte, and tried to make sense of the storm inside her head. 2 weeks passed. Jessica stopped jumping every time the door chimed. She stopped scanning every crowd for a familiar face. She stopped reaching for her phone, expecting messages that never came. Eric had gone silent. No calls. No texts. No showing up at her apartment or her work. It was as if he had simply erased himself from her existence, honoring her request with a finality that somehow hurt worse than his persistence would have. She should have been relieved. This was what she wanted. A clean break. Space to heal. Instead, she felt hollow. Her apartment had never seemed so quiet. The romance novels she used to devour sat unread on her nightstand. Even the folk music at Rosaline's, which had always been a comfort, now reminded her of mornings spent watching Eric drink his black coffee at the corner table. Everything reminded her of him. The worst part was the nights. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering the weight of his arm around her waist. The sound of his breathing as he slept. The way he would pull her closer if she tried to move away, like even unconscious, he couldn't bear to let her go. Had any of that been real? She went back and forth constantly. Some nights, she convinced herself it was all a lie. A performance designed to keep her compliant and available. Other nights, she remembered the look in his eyes when he told her she was the only thing that made sense. The crack in his voice when he said he didn't deserve her. That wasn't acting. It couldn't be. But if it was real, then why had he let her go so easily? The answer came 3 weeks after their breakup, in the form of a newspaper. Jessica was closing up Rosaline's on a Wednesday evening when she spotted a copy of Willamette Week on one of the tables. A customer must have left it behind. She picked it up to throw it away, but a photograph on the front page stopped her cold. Eric. He was being escorted out of a building downtown, surrounded by men in suits. The headline read, Gomez family heir faces federal investigation. Jessica sank into the nearest chair and read. The article detailed an ongoing federal investigation into the Gomez family's business operations. Allegations of money laundering, tax fraud, racketeering. Eric was named as a person of interest, though no charges had been filed yet. But that wasn't what made Jessica's blood run cold. It was the paragraph near the end. Sources close to the investigation indicate that Gomez has been cooperative with federal authorities, potentially providing information in exchange for immunity. This has reportedly made him a target within his own organization, with several associates allegedly threatening retaliation. Jessica read the paragraph 3 times. Eric was cooperating with the feds. Eric was turning on his own people. Eric was in danger. And he had walked away from her without a word. The pieces started clicking together in her head. The distraction in the weeks before their breakup. The way he had said he was handling complicated business. The fear in his eyes when he told her being close to him was dangerous. He hadn't abandoned her because he didn't care. He had abandoned her because he cared too much. Jessica sat in the empty coffee shop, the newspaper trembling in her hands, and felt the entire narrative of their relationship shift beneath her feet. All those times he ignored her in public. All those cold words to his associates. The performance of cruelty designed to make everyone believe she meant nothing. What if it wasn't shame? What if it was protection? What if Eric Gomez had been trying to save her life, and she had been too hurt to see it? Jessica pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking as she scrolled to his contact, to the conversation that had ended 3 weeks ago with unanswered messages. She started typing, then stopped. What would she even say? I'm sorry. I understand now. Please tell me you're okay. She didn't know if he wanted to hear from her. Didn't know if reaching out would make things better or worse. Didn't know anything except that somewhere in Portland, the man she loved was in danger, and she was sitting here doing nothing. For 20 minutes, she stared at the blank message. Then she turned off her phone, locked up the coffee shop, and walked home through streets that had never felt so empty. She needed time to think. She just hoped Eric had time to spare. For days after reading the newspaper, Jessica got a visitor she never expected. She was restocking coffee beans in the back room of Rosaline's when she heard the bell chime. Nothing unusual. But then the footsteps stopped abruptly, and no one called out an order. Jessica wiped her hands on her apron and walked out front. A man stood by the counter. She recognized him immediately, one of Eric's associates. The one who always stood closest to him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a jagged scar running down his left cheek. His name was Marco. She had seen him dozens of times but never spoken to him directly. Jessica's heart slammed against her ribs. We're open, she said carefully. Can I get you something? Marco didn't smile. His eyes swept the empty shop, checking corners and exits like it was second nature. Then his gaze settled on her. You're Jessica, he said. Not a question. Yes. I work for Eric. I know. Marco nodded slowly. He seemed to be weighing something, deciding how much to say. Finally, he reached into his jacket pocket. Jessica tensed. But he only pulled out a folded envelope. He asked me to give you this, Marco said. Before everything went sideways. Made me promise that if something happened to him, I'd make sure you got it. Jessica stared at the envelope. Her name was written on the front in handwriting she recognized. If something happened to him? Her voice came out strangled. What does that mean? Is he okay? Marco's expression flickered. Something that might have been respect crossed his scarred face. He's alive, he said. For now. But things are complicated. The feds, the family, it's a mess. He's trying to clean up years of dirt, and not everyone wants him to succeed. Is he in danger? He's been in danger his whole life. This is just a different kind. Marco pushed the envelope across the counter toward her. Read it. He wanted you to understand. Jessica picked up the envelope with trembling fingers. Why didn't he give this to me himself? Because he knew you'd try to come back to him. And right now, being close to him could get you killed. Marco turned toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I've known Eric for 15 years. I've seen him with a lot of women. He never looked at any of them the way he looks at you. Then he was gone. Jessica stood alone in the empty coffee shop, holding an envelope that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She waited until her shift ended. Waited until she was home, sitting on her couch, with the door locked and the curtains drawn. Only then did she open the envelope. Inside was a letter. 3 pages handwritten, the words slightly uneven like they had been written quickly. Jessica took a breath and began to read. Jessica, if you're reading this, then Marco kept his promise, which means things have gotten bad enough that I couldn't deliver this myself. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for so many things that I don't know where to begin. I need you to understand something. Everything I said that day outside on Dina, every word that made you look at me like I had ripped your heart out, it was a lie. The cruelest, most necessary lie I've ever told. Those men I was with are not my friends. They are my father's men. Men who have been watching me since I took over the family, waiting for any sign of weakness they could exploit. And you, Jessica, are my greatest weakness. The moment they realized how much you mean to me, you would become a target. Leverage. A way to control me or destroy me. So I made them believe you were nothing. I stood there and said horrible things about the woman I love because I knew they were listening. I knew they were testing me. And I knew that if I showed even a flicker of genuine feeling, they would find you. They would hurt you. And I would burn the entire world down trying to save you, which is exactly what they want. I should have told you. I know that now. I should have trusted you with the truth instead of letting you believe I was ashamed of you. But I was terrified. Not of my enemies. I faced them my whole life. I was terrified of you. Of how much I needed you. Of how completely you had taken over my heart without even trying. I've never been in love before. I didn't know what it felt like until you. And by the time I understood what was happening, I was already in too deep to protect either of us. The things you read in the newspaper are true. I'm cooperating with the federal government. I'm dismantling everything my father built, every corrupt system that has kept my family in power for 3 generations. It's the only way to get free. The only way to become someone worthy of you. But it's dangerous. There are people who want me dead for what I'm doing. And until this is over, I can't be near you. I can't risk them using you against me. I can't risk your life for my happiness. Please know that walking away from you was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than facing my father's legacy. Harder than betraying men who would kill me without hesitation. Every night, I lie awake thinking about you. Wondering if you're okay. Hoping you've found some peace, even if it's not with me. I don't expect you to wait for me. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know the truth. I need you to know that you were never nobody to me. You were everything. You still are. If I survive this, I'm going to find you. I'm going to stand in front of you and tell you everything I should have said from the beginning. I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of the love you gave me so freely, when I had done nothing to deserve it. But if I don't survive, if this letter is the last thing you ever receive from me, then please, just know this. Loving you was the best thing I ever did. You made me believe I could be more than what I was born into. You made me want to be good. Thank you for that. I love you, Jessica. I always will. Eric. Jessica read the letter 3 times. By the end, she was sobbing so hard she could barely see the words. Everything made sense now. The public coldness. The private tenderness. The way he held her like she might disappear. The fear in his eyes that she had mistaken for something else entirely. He loved her. He had loved her all along. And he had pushed her away to keep her safe. Jessica pressed the letter to her chest and cried until she had nothing left. Then she sat in the silence of her apartment, surrounded by the echoes of everything she had misunderstood, and made a decision. She was done running. She was done hiding. She was done letting fear dictate her life. Eric was out there somewhere, fighting a war she didn't fully understand, believing she hated him. Believing he had lost her forever. She couldn't let that stand. Jessica picked up her phone and scrolled to the last text Eric had sent, 3 weeks ago. Please answer me. She typed a response. I read your letter. I understand now. I'm not going anywhere. When this is over, come find me. I'll be waiting. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. For a long moment, nothing happened. The message sat there, delivered but unread. Jessica stared at her phone, heart pounding, wondering if she was too late. Then 3 dots appeared. Eric was typing. The dots disappeared. Appeared again. Disappeared. Finally, a message came through. I don't deserve you. Jessica smiled through her tears and typed back, "Probably not. Come home anyway." His response was immediate. "Soon. I promise. Wait for me." Jessica set down her phone and looked out the window at the Portland skyline. Somewhere out there, Eric was fighting for his future. For their future. And for the first time in weeks, Jessica felt something she had forgotten was possible. Hope. 6 weeks. That's how long Jessica waited. 6 weeks of checking her phone constantly. 6 weeks of scanning every newspaper for mentions of the Gomez family. 6 weeks of jumping every time the bell above Rosaline's door chimed, hoping to see a familiar face. Eric texted when he could. Short messages, usually late at night. "Thinking about you. Still here. Still fighting. Miss you more than I can say." Sometimes days would pass without a word, and Jessica would lie awake imagining the worst. Car accidents. Gunshots. A body found floating in the Willamette River. The possibilities haunted her dreams. But then her phone would buzz, and his name would appear, and she could breathe again. The federal investigation dominated local news. Every week brought new developments. Arrests of men Jessica recognized from that day outside Ondina. Seizures of properties and bank accounts. A slow, methodical dismantling of an empire that had stood for decades. Eric's name appeared occasionally, always as a cooperating witness. Never as a defendant. The articles painted him as the heir who had turned against his own blood, helping prosecutors build cases against men his father had trusted. Jessica couldn't imagine what that cost him. She kept working at Rosaline's. Kept going through the motions of a normal life. But something had shifted inside her. The shyness that had defined her for so long began to feel less like protection and more like a prison. She started making small changes. She stopped avoiding eye contact with customers. Started remembering their names, asking about their lives, letting conversations extend beyond the transactional. One regular, a retired teacher named Dorothy, began staying after her morning coffee just to chat. "You're different lately," Dorothy observed one morning. "More present." Jessica smiled. "I'm working on it." "Someone special?" The question should have made her retreat. Instead, Jessica found herself nodding. "Yeah," she said softly. "Someone special." Dorothy's eyes crinkled with warmth. "Good. Everyone deserves someone who makes them want to be braver." That's exactly what Eric had done for her. Even from a distance. Even through the pain of their separation. He had made her want to be braver. The weeks continued to pass. Jessica started calling her sister. The first conversation was awkward. 2 years of silence couldn't be erased in 20 minutes. But Sarah answered. "That was something." "I didn't think you'd ever reach out," Sarah said, her voice cautious. "Neither did I," Jessica admitted. "But I've been thinking about things differently lately. About what matters. About the stupid stuff I let get in the way." "The guy? The one we fought about?" "He's long gone. I don't even remember what I saw in him." Sarah laughed. It sounded rusty, like she hadn't done it in a while. "Me neither, honestly. I think we were both just looking for something to fight about." "Probably." They talked for an hour that first night. Then again a few days later. Then every week. The relationship wasn't healed, not completely. But it was healing. And that mattered. Jessica also started walking differently through Portland. She explored neighborhoods she had avoided before. Ate at restaurants alone, which had always terrified her. Sat in coffee shops that weren't her own and watched people without feeling invisible. She was still quiet. Still introverted. But the loneliness had transformed into something more like solitude. A choice rather than a sentence. Eric noticed the change, even from afar. "You sound different in your messages," he texted one night. "Stronger." "I'm trying," she replied. "You make me want to try. You always had it in you. I just helped you see it." Jessica smiled at her phone in the darkness of her bedroom. Maybe he was right. Maybe the strength had always been there, buried under years of believing she was nobody special. But Eric had been the one to unearth it. To see her when she felt invisible. To treat her like she mattered when she had forgotten how to believe it herself. She would never forget that. 7 weeks after the breakup, Jessica received a different kind of text. It came at 2 in the morning, jolting her awake with the buzz of her phone. It's done. She sat up in bed, heart racing. What do you mean? She typed back. The investigation. The deal. Everything. It's finished. I'm free. Jessica's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. What happens now? The dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Now I come home to you. If you'll still have me. Tears streamed down Jessica's face. She typed through the blur. I told you I'd be waiting. I need to wrap up some things. Legal paperwork, mostly. A few days. Maybe a week. I've waited this long. I can wait a little more. Jessica? Yeah? I love you. She stared at the words glowing on her screen. 3 simple words that carried the weight of everything they had been through. I love you too, she typed back. Hurry home. The next week was the longest of Jessica's life. She cleaned her apartment 3 times. Changed her sheets. Bought new towels. Stocked her refrigerator with food she wasn't sure Eric even liked because she realized how little she knew about his everyday preferences. Did he like orange juice or apple juice? Did he take cream in his coffee when he wasn't at Rosaline's? Did he prefer morning showers or evening baths? They had spent months together in his world. Now he was entering hers. The thought was terrifying. Her apartment was tiny. 1 room, a bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. She had decorated it with thrift store finds and second-hand furniture. It was cozy, but it wasn't the sleek penthouse in the Pearl District. What if he took one look at her real life and realized she wasn't worth the trouble? The old insecurities crept back, whispering their familiar poison. You're not enough. He'll see who you really are and leave. You're nobody special. But now, Jessica knew how to fight back. She thought about the letter. The words Eric had written when he thought he might die. You were everything. You still are. Loving you was the best thing I ever did. You made me want to be good. Those weren't the words of a man who cared about the size of her apartment or the age of her furniture. Those were the words of a man who saw her. Really saw her. And loved what he found. Jessica took a deep breath and let the insecurities fade. She was ready. Whatever came next, she was ready. 8 days after his final text, Eric Gomez showed up at Rosaline's coffee house. Jessica was behind the counter, making a latte for a young woman with headphones in, when the bell chimed. She glanced up automatically, expecting another regular. Instead, she saw him. He stood in the doorway, just like the first time. Tall and broad-shouldered, tattoos visible on his neck and forearms. The scar through his eyebrow. The dark eyes that had haunted her dreams for months. But something was different. He looked lighter. The constant tension she'd grown accustomed to seeing in his shoulders had eased. The hardness around his mouth had softened. He looked like a man who had set down a burden he'd been carrying his entire life. And he was looking at her like she was the reason. The latte machine hissed. Jessica ignored it. Eric walked toward the counter. His steps were slow, almost hesitant, like he was afraid she might disappear if he moved too fast. He stopped on the other side of the register. Neither of them spoke. The young woman with headphones cleared her throat. Is my latte ready? Jessica blinked, turned, finished the latte on autopilot and handed it over with a distracted smile. When she looked back, Eric was still there. Still watching her. Hi, he said. His voice was rough. Uncertain. Nothing like the commanding tone she remembered from his public persona. Jessica's eyes burned with tears. Hi, she whispered back. Eric glanced around the shop. A few customers sat scattered at tables, paying them no attention. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Somewhere private?" Jessica nodded. She untied her apron, called to the part-timer in the back to cover the register, and led Eric through the door to the storage room. It was cramped and cluttered, surrounded by boxes of coffee beans and stacks of paper cups. Not exactly romantic. But the moment the door closed behind them, none of that mattered. Eric cupped her face in his hands. Those same tattooed hands that had held her so gently all those nights. His thumbs brushed away the tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," he said. "For everything. For the lies. For the pain. For making you feel like you weren't enough when you were always more than I deserved." Jessica shook her head. "You explained it. In the letter. I understand." "Understanding isn't the same as forgiving." "Then I forgive you." She placed her hands over his, holding them against her face. "I forgave you the moment I read your words. I just needed you to come home." Eric's composure cracked. His eyes glistened with emotion he was clearly fighting to control. "I'm out," he said. "Completely. The investigation is closed. I have immunity for my cooperation. The family is being dismantled. For the first time in my life, I'm free." "What are you going to do with that freedom?" He pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers. "Spend it with you," he said. "If you'll let me." Jessica smiled through her tears. "Then stop asking and start staying." Eric kissed her. It was different from all the kisses that came before. Not desperate. Not hungry. Just tender and deep, and full of every promise he hadn't been able to make until now. When they finally pulled apart, Jessica laughed softly. "You know," she said, "you still owe me for about 50 cups of black coffee." Eric grinned. That real, rare grin she had fallen in love with. "I'll pay you back. Every day for the rest of my life." 1 year later, Jessica stood in a place she never expected to be. Behind the counter of her own coffee shop. It was a small space on Southeast Hawthorne Boulevard, just 3 blocks from her old apartment. Exposed brick walls, mismatched wooden chairs, a chalkboard menu that Jessica still rewrote every Monday. The folk music played softly through speakers mounted in the corners. She had named it Rosaline's too. The original Rosaline had cried when Jessica told her. The old woman had been ready to retire for years, and knowing her legacy would continue in some form made the decision easier. She visited every Sunday now, sitting in the corner booth with a cup of chamomile tea, watching Jessica work with undisguised pride. "You've built something beautiful," Rosaline said during one of those visits. "I always knew you had it in you." Jessica smiled and refilled her tea. "I had good teachers." The shop wasn't fancy. It wasn't trendy. It wouldn't win any design awards or attract influencers looking for the perfect backdrop. But it was warm and genuine and exactly what Jessica had always wanted without knowing how to ask for it. A place where people could feel seen. She had hired 2 part-time employees. College students who reminded her of herself at that age, quiet and uncertain but desperate for someone to believe in them. She taught them about coffee, about customer service, about the small gestures that made people feel valued. Dorothy, the retired teacher, had followed her to the new location. So had a dozen other regulars from the original Rosalines. Word spread slowly, the way it did in Portland neighborhoods, and within 6 months, Jessica had built something sustainable. Not wildly successful. Not revolutionary. Just enough. Eric was a constant presence, though he was careful about how he showed it. In the early months after their reunion, they had long conversations about what their relationship would look like. The old rules were gone. No more hiding, no more pretending she didn't exist. But Eric's past meant certain precautions were still necessary. He didn't advertise their relationship to strangers. Didn't post photographs on social media. Didn't show up at the coffee shop surrounded by bodyguards or draw unnecessary attention. But he also didn't ignore her. When he walked into Rosaline's too, he walked straight to the counter, kissed her on the cheek, and ordered his coffee like any other customer. When they passed each other on the street, he reached for her hand. When they ate dinner at restaurants around the city, he sat across from her and looked at her like she was the only person in the room. Not hidden. Just private. There was a difference, Jessica had learned. And it made all the difference. Eric had changed in the year since the investigation ended. The weight he'd carried for so long had lifted, leaving behind a man she was still getting to know. He smiled more easily now. Laughed at her terrible jokes. Spent Saturday mornings cooking elaborate breakfasts in her tiny kitchen, claiming her cast-iron skillet was better than anything in his penthouse. He had sold the penthouse 3 months after they reunited. Too many memories, he explained. From the old life. I want something new. They found an apartment together in the Selwood neighborhood, a 2-bedroom unit in a converted Victorian house. It had creaky floors and drafty windows and a backyard shared with the downstairs neighbors, who had 2 golden retrievers and a vegetable garden. It was nothing like the sleek luxury Eric had grown up with. He loved it. This feels like a home, he said the first night they spent there, standing in the middle of their half-unpacked living room. I've never had that before. Jessica wrapped her arms around him from behind. You do now. The changes in Eric extended beyond their personal life. He had used his remaining resources, the legitimate ones, carefully separated from his family's criminal enterprises, to start a foundation. It funded job training programs for people leaving prison, helping them build new lives the way Eric was trying to build his own. I spent years benefiting from a system that destroyed people, he told Jessica one evening, reviewing grant applications at their kitchen table. I can't undo that. But I can try to balance the scales. It wasn't enough to erase his past. He knew that. Jessica knew that. Some debts could never be fully repaid. But he was trying. Every day he was trying. That mattered more than perfection ever could. Jessica's relationship with her sister continued to heal. Sarah flew out from Ohio for Thanksgiving, the first time the sisters had been in the same room in nearly 3 years. There were awkward moments. Old tensions that surfaced unexpectedly. A few arguments about things that shouldn't have mattered but somehow still did. But there was also laughter. Shared memories. The slow rebuilding of a bond that had never completely broken, just frayed. I like him, Sarah said on her last night in Portland, nodding toward Eric, who was doing dishes in the kitchen. He's not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone scarier. Someone who wouldn't spend 20 minutes asking about my book club. Jessica smiled. He's a good listener. He loves you. That's obvious to anyone with eyes. Sarah paused. And you love him? I do. Good. Sarah squeezed her hand. You deserve that, Jess. You always did. You just never believed it. Jessica watched Eric through the kitchen doorway. He had rolled up his sleeves, exposing the tattoos that used to seem so intimidating. Now they were just part of him. Just another thing she loved. I'm starting to believe it now, she said. Spring arrived in Portland with its usual mix of rain and tentative sunshine. Jessica was closing up the shop on a Tuesday evening, wiping down tables and humming along to the music, when the bell chimed. We're closed, she called without looking up. Open again at 7 tomorrow. Even for me? She turned. Eric stood in the doorway, wearing the same charcoal gray coat he'd worn the first time he walked into Rosaline's. His dark hair was slightly damp from the rain outside. His eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. What are you doing here? She asked. I thought you had a meeting. It ended early. He walked toward her slowly, hands in his pockets. I wanted to see you. You saw me this morning. That was hours ago. Jessica laughed. You're ridiculous. Maybe. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the rain on his coat. But I have a good reason for being here. Something in his expression made her pause. A nervousness she rarely saw in him. A vulnerability that reminded her of those early days, when he was still learning how to let her in. "Eric? What's going on?" He took a breath. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Jessica's heart stopped. "I had a whole speech planned," Eric said. "Something about how you changed my life. How you made me want to be better. How every day with you feels like a gift I don't deserve but can't stop accepting." He opened the box. Inside was a ring. Simple and elegant. A single diamond on a thin gold band. "But then I realized that you already know all of that. You've known it for a long time. So instead, I'm just going to ask." He met her eyes, and his voice was steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Jessica Richards, will you marry me?" The coffee shop was silent except for the soft folk music playing through the speakers. The same music that had been playing the day they met. The same music that had soundtracked every moment of their unlikely love story. Jessica looked at the ring. At Eric. At the life she had built from nothing, in a city where she had once been invisible. She thought about the shy, lonely woman she used to be. The one who moved through the world like a ghost, afraid to take up space, convinced she would never matter to anyone. That woman was still part of her. Would always be part of her. But she was more than that now. "Yes," she whispered. Eric's face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and lifted her off the ground, spinning her in a circle while she laughed against his shoulder. When he set her down, he kissed her. Long and deep and full of every promise they had made to each other over the past year. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you too." They stood there in the empty coffee shop, wrapped in each other's arms, while the rain tapped gently against the windows. Outside, Portland carried on with its usual rhythms. Cars splashing through puddles. People hurrying home under umbrellas. A city full of strangers, each with their own stories. But inside Rosaline's too, there were no strangers. Just two people who had found each other against all odds, and who had chosen again and again to stay. The wedding was small. They held it in the backyard of their Selwood apartment on a sunny Saturday in June. Rosaline was there, seated in a place of honor near the front. Sarah flew in from Ohio, serving as Jessica's maid of honor. Marco, the scarred associate who had delivered Eric's letter, stood as his best man. 30 guests in total. Friends from the coffee shop. Neighbors from the Victorian house. A handful of people from Eric's new life, the one built on something other than fear. No one from his old life. That chapter was closed forever. Jessica wore a simple white dress she had found at a vintage shop on Hawthorne. Eric wore a charcoal suit without a tie, his tattoos visible above the collar. They wrote their own vows. "You saw me when I was invisible," Jessica said, her voice trembling but strong. "You made me feel like I mattered when I had forgotten how. I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel alone again." Eric's eyes glistened as he spoke his own words. "You saved me," he said simply. "From my family. From my past. From myself. I don't know what I did to deserve you. But I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of your love." They exchanged rings. They kissed. Their small gathering of guests cheered and clapped. And somewhere above them, the sun broke through the clouds like a blessing. That night, after the guests had gone home and the backyard had been cleaned up, Jessica and Eric sat on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge. "So," Eric said, "how does it feel to be Mrs. Gomez?" Jessica leaned her head against his shoulder. "Ask me again in 50 years. Deal." They sat in comfortable silence for a long time. The neighborhood was quiet. The golden retrievers next door had finally stopped barking. Somewhere down the street, someone was playing guitar. "Thank you," Jessica said eventually. "For what?" "For walking into that coffee shop. For seeing me. For not giving up, even when I pushed you away. Eric pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Thank you for waiting for me. Even when I didn't deserve it. You deserved it. You just didn't believe it yet. He pulled her closer. I believe it now. Jessica smiled and closed her eyes. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. The loneliness. The fear. The pain of loving someone in secret. The greater pain of almost losing him. None of it had been easy. None of it had gone according to plan. But sitting here, wrapped in the arms of the man she loved, in the home they had built together, Jessica wouldn't have changed a single thing. Because sometimes, the best stories don't start with a grand gesture or a perfect meet-cute. Sometimes, they start with a shy barista and a cup of black coffee. And they end exactly where they're supposed to. Home. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If this story made you feel something, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and I love hearing from you. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, sometimes the people who seem the hardest to reach are the ones who need love the most. See you in the next one.